Pastors podcast, part of the G's Culture Podcast Network. Always good to be with you guys. Having a blast in season one. I mean, season one already, I can tell for me, it's just really impacted me already. And so it's just fun to sit down. It's fun to sit down with people that are in the trenches doing the work and really growing from it. We had to cut Phil off one time as he was about to go into an altar call, and we had to pull him back, but...
Well, Phil's passion is absolutely off the hook.
Yep.
It moves us, but sometimes it moves us a bit too much.
A bit too much on a podcast.
Like, hey, Phil, we're on a podcast.
Dial it back. And the guest today, we're actually going to be talking about pastors and prophets. We're going to be talking about the prophetic. This is a very large subject, one that is probably at the forefront right now because of 2020, and we're going to talk about that. But I don't know, when we sat down and said, hey, here's the topics we want to talk about, we brought up the prophetic, there obviously was the choice. I don't know of another prophetic father, a prophet father in the nation of my own life that I trust at the level that I do, Kris Vallotton. And so we're excited to be able to just welcome in and have Kris Vallotton with us today. Kris, we really appreciate you taking time just to come in and talk to the people that are listening.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Now, Kris is one that we almost didn't bring on as well because Nate and I have a really great relationship with Kris. I've known Kris for a long time. Kris came into my life when I was 19, and Kris is the first father in my life. I will never forget this. I owe Kris a lot, and I mean this. I owe Kris a lot, but one of the things I owe him is I was probably 20, maybe 21, and he full on sat me down. If you know Kris, this is Kris 101. He sat me down in his office. I'm a 21-year-old youth pastor. And he just full on said, you are independent. You have a spirit of independence on you. Like full on. And I will never forget sitting in his office as a 21-year-old youth pastor crying, just like sobbing. And he full on was just like, you are independent. You have a spirit of independence. You are not. And I was incredible. And I remember crying in his office, realizing you're right, but I just don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to be. And it started a journey for me, honestly, about I don't know how to be fathered. And I'm going to start that journey. And Kris was really there with me in really learning what it is to be fathered. But he just went straight at it, 21-year-old. I'm in his office, just sobbing as he's as he's telling me I'm independent.
I've got to share this Kris story because we've got Kris on here. I've got countless Kris stories. We could do a whole podcast.
The problem is that he has us stories too. Well,
he can share whatever he wants because he's our guest. Yes. But I'm in Australia with Kris. And we're heading to a conference. It's the last night of the conference. We're 15 minutes away from this gathering, hundreds of people, maybe 1,000. And Kris looks back at me. I'm in the back of the car. He turns around. He says, you're preaching tonight. Oh. Now, he was supposed to preach. It's the final night. Everyone's showing up. They want to hear Kris, not Nate, right? Kris from Bethel, not Nate from the other church in Redding. And he's like, you're preaching. So I've got 15 minutes to get a word, and I am just stressed out. So we get there. We get to the place. We're late, so I don't even have worship. Remember that? I don't have worship to get the word. At least you
don't have the green room.
No, I don't. No green room, no worship. So we get there. Literally, I get up front. They throw the Britney Spears mic on me, and I've got like 2 minutes before I'm going up. And I come over to Kris, and I just kind of I grab the hem of his garment, and I said, Kris, pray for me. And he looks at me and he says, no. And he turns me around and says, I believe in you, get on stage. And he throws me on stage. And in a moment, I'm terrified. I preached a message. It was okay. But I learned something that day that, and honestly, like it's moved me ever since, but I've learned sometimes you need the prayer of a father. Yeah. Sometimes you need the push of a father.
Yeah, it's so
And Kris
good.
has been one of those guys that has pushed me. He's believed in me. He's championed me. And sometimes we think we need a prayer when actually we need somebody that actually sees in us what we can't see in us.
Oh, that's amazing. That's a good word. And most of the time,
it was a great message, by the way.
You remember it.
It was actually a great message. Oh, yeah, we talked about it afterward.
That's incredible. Well, Kris, we're hoping to end up that Phil wants a word from you. Phil just said, we were telling...
My only Kris story is I want a word and I haven't got one.
Yeah, this is true, Kris. Nate and I were both talking about words that you've given us and just different things. We were getting ready, and Phil's like, I want a word from Kris.
It just made me insecure and jealous.
Kris, here's what we'd like to talk about. We've got pastors, from America, from all over the world that will be listening right now. Not just senior pastors, but all different levels, bivocational, all that type of stuff. What we may get to is this: how do you pastor and create a prophetic culture? How do you interact with prophets as a pastor? And I'm saying pastor, not in the fivefold. I'm talking about in the leading of a local church. But here's maybe what we want to throw out there first. And this won't apply to everybody because not everybody is in America. But let me just preface all this. I'm somebody that believes deeply in the prophetic.
Yes.
Like our life has been directed by the prophetic.
Right.
I lean into the prophetic. It is dreams and prophetic words. We're currently in the building we're in right now because of a word Kris gave me. Like this building we bought because Kris called me with a vision that he had. I'm like, the prophetic has been an integral part of our story.
Right.
And still is. And I was raised by Kris, a prophet, and I was raised by, I was influenced by Lou Engle, who, everything he does is based around the prophetic. But I'm around pastors right now who 2020 was a doozy when it came to the prophetic. When it came to the election, when it came to the prophetic words, when it came to COVID and these prophets and the words and all this type of stuff. And my heart for, again, I'm not using the word pastor in the fivefold sense exactly, and we maybe unpack that in another episode. I'm talking about those that are leading local churches. I'm just encountering some that are just struggling to try to figure out what just happened, and are distancing themselves a little bit from the prophetic, which I am like, no, you can't do that. No, like the prophetic is a really integral part of what we're doing. And even Phil, I mean, you mentioned Phil, so they're hurt.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I mean, I think this, what happened in so many pastors' lives is that the voices of the prophets, we're generalizing, right?
Yeah, all generalization. We're gonna have sweeping generalizations right now because it's hard to be.
In this year, there was a consensus of the prophetic community, and what happened is that consensus got weaponized against the local church, and it got weaponized specifically against pastors who were leading their local churches to the best of their ability in their convictions. And this really painful thing, and I have a lot of thoughts, I'm sure we all have a lot of thoughts on it, but this really, really painful thing where what happened is that people used the prophets as attacks against their pastors. And it's not just that it was in the foolish and immaturity of people, which it was.
It was.
But it was also that it was, I mean, how many different leaders said, if you don't do blank, you're a coward. And this breaking between the prophetic community and the pastoral community that I actually think is really significant and really painful. And we have to own that it happened. And we have to work towards repairing it, because I think what we all share as a consensus is that we can't actually break from one another.
No.
But I think without owning it and without honoring it, that is what has happened for a lot of people. And I do think there is a lot of pastors who got wounded through this year through what happened in the prophetic community.
That's right. Well, it seemed like people in our church put more weight in what the national prophets were saying than even some of their local church pastors, which created a bit of a tearing and tornness of people listening to this video or saying this prophet saying this, and created quite a bit of division. I know in our local church of trying to figure out what is God saying, and definitely trying to navigate. How do we move forward in this?
And Kris, I actually just think, like, I want, even in our heart, like, I just want to come with honor towards you.
Yes.
Like, we honor you. And in many ways, I feel like what I want to do is almost embody or try to just come to you with saying, I wonder how many local church pastors just wish they had the chance to go, hey, this hurt.
Yeah.
Help me. And so almost in that sense, I just feel like I want to come to you on behalf of them and just kind of offer that to you.
Yeah. So, and again, this is probably for those in America, but I know that other people around the world were watching what unfolded. So, Kris, here's what I would like to do. I don't know you are a father in the prophetic. You are a prophet. You are a father. You're also somebody who's deeply, deeply embedded in the local church.
That's
I mean,
right.
your teeth was cut in a small church in a small town, and you still
Yep.
are very deeply involved in the local church in leading. I guess I would just say, hey, can I just invite you into a living room full of people that are leading the local church and saying, what's the advice? How are we navigating out of whatever just happened? And we can get to practicals later if we want to, but I do think it's a moment for us just to be able to kind of hear your thought. I mean, I'm calling you, asking you these questions, so giving you access to them. So that's a really general statement, a really general question, but we just would love to invite you into the living room full of a bunch of pastors sitting here saying, I don't know what just happened, and there's a ton of stuff, and what he said it was, a lot of this stuff was, people sending us videos of all these national prophets telling us that we're wrong because of how we're handling things, whatever else. So anyways, we're just inviting you in the living room. Here it is. Floor's yours.
Well, first of all, I think it's a beautiful opportunity. I see 2020 as a beautiful opportunity to actually grow our culture, our kingdom cultures with Jesus at the cross and at the center. And I think that what the prophetic words exposed, including mine, is not just a wrong prophetic word in my case, but also a really dysfunctional or low-functioning culture and community of believers. So, I'll say like, let's see, how do I put this in a way that people can understand? Like, I don't think missing a prophetic word is that big of a deal.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's supposed to be a culture of judging prophetic words. Let me give you a couple of scriptures. You probably know these, but 1 Thessalonians 5, I think it's 19, says, do not quench the spirit, do not despise prophetic utterances, examine everything carefully, and hold fast to what is good. So let's go back. Do not quench the spirit. Okay, what's the next verse? Do not despise prophetic utterances. We'd have to say that despising prophetic utterances is quenching the spirit, according to the context.
Yep.
And then he gives them an answer to their supposed problem. Examine everything carefully and hold fast to what is good. So in the context, it would appear that they're beginning to despise prophetic utterances because they have prophetic words that are wrong. And he goes, the solution is not to shut it down.
Yeah.
It's to create a culture of purity through process of the prophetic words.
Yeah.
1 Corinthians 14 says, and Paul, the context of chapter 14 is actually prophetic ministry, but then he veers from the prophetic ministry and says, let 2 or 3 prophets speak and let the others pass judgment. I like that he actually shifted from the whole, like that's the only time in chapter 14 that prophets are mentioned, because he's actually talking about everyone can prophesy. You can all prophesy one by one. Earnestly desire spiritual gifts, but especially that you prophesy. So the context is actually prophecy, but when he talks about judgment, he says, let 2 or 3 prophets speak and let the others pass judgment. As we know, the gift of prophecy is a gift of the Holy Spirit. The office of a prophet is the gift of Christ. So, and what I like about it is in his wisdom, he ups the ante and he goes, even if you're a prophet, your word should be spoken in the backdrop of people judging your word. So in the Old Testament, we judge prophets. In the New Testament, we judge prophetic words. So, Benny, let me say one more thing, and then you can jump in.
There's nothing. I'm not jumping in. Keep going. I have nothing to say.
A great example of the context in prophecy, if I could just move for a second to teachers. First of all, James says that teachers, don't let all of you be teachers because you incur stricter judgment. Isn't it interesting that the stricter judgment isn't on prophets, it's on actually teachers? And then there's a man in Acts 18 who's named Apollos, and he's called, I'll quote it here. This man had been instructed in the way of the Lord, being fervent in spirit. He was accurately speaking of the teachings about Jesus and being acquainted only of this baptism of John. And he began speaking boldly in the synagogue. And then it goes on, Priscilla and Aquila heard him and took him aside and explained to him the way of God, get this, more accurately. So, in other words, he was mighty in the scriptures, but not everything he was saying was accurate, and he was not considered a false teacher. So Priscilla and Aquila took him aside, explained the word to him more accurately. And my point is, teachers have a stricter judgment than anyone, according to James.
Yeah.
And nobody called him a false teacher because he wasn't accurate. And I'd like to just point out that the idea that there are some people in the body of Christ who are held to an infallible standard is a cult waiting to happen.
Yeah, so true.
Wow.
I can say I'm a prophet, and suddenly you're supposed to think. Now think about this. The body's supposed to think, this person is infallible. I'm like, that is the beginning of a cult. That's a Jim Jones waiting to happen. And I'm saying,
really good.
James writes this concerning teachers. He says, now, don't let many of you become teachers, my brother, knowing that you incur a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many ways. This is James. We all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man, able to bride the entire body. But his point is, none of us are perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm saying it scares me the way the body of Christ deals
Great
with.
word.
Because like, oh my gosh, the whole world's burning down. Like, if the whole world's burning down, it isn't just because Kris Vallotton got a word wrong, but he did. It's because you didn't train your flock and yourselves to actually realize that there's no such thing as an infallible person in the body of Christ.
Wow.
And when you make someone infallible, you have created a cult. And when you think you're infallible, you have become the cult leader. So I just want to begin there by saying, like, it's ridiculous to think that there are people who speak for God and never get it wrong. And I like to add, in my ministry and many, many other of the prophets, I feel like my accuracy is excellent, but it's not perfect.
Yeah.
And I've said, and even in my apology, like,
Wow.
I have never had to apologize for a governmental word in my 15-year history of going to DC 4 times a year and traveling the world speaking to governmental people. That doesn't mean I never got one wrong, because sometimes people don't feed back to you. Sometimes the prophetic words take time to happen. Like Josiah gets prophesied that there'll be a man named Josiah becomes king. It was 320 years later that he became king. Kind of hard to judge that word.
Yeah.
But my point is that I feel like my prophetic ministry is excellent. Like this is the first inaccuracy that I personally know about in the realm of politics, and I've been doing this for 15 years and probably give at least 100 words a year. I don't mean it's the only one. It's the only one I know
Sure,
of.
that makes sense.
I'm pointing out, like, there's a difference between excellent and perfect.
Right.
I don't know anyone who has a perfect ministry in anything. I don't know a counselor who has a perfect record of reconciling marriages, or a deliverance ministry that has a perfect record of casting out demons, or a teacher that's never made a mistake from the podium. I don't know anyone like that. So what's shocking to me, and I do get it, is that people are like, oh my gosh, I've lost my faith in the prophetic. I'm like, your faith was in an infallible person? Like, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a good challenge, Kris.
Yeah.
And I'm like, go back and look. Like, I prophesied both Bush's presidencies, both Obama's presidencies, the Trump presidency, when the 2 days after he proclaimed himself a candidate, which is super high risk.
Yep.
The Y2K prophesied that right. The Iraqi war, I got that right. Those are all public prophecies that people can go back and look at. And I'm not just defending myself. I'm saying many of the prophets have that level of accuracy. And I clearly missed that prophetic word. I 100% admit it. But it shouldn't be like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to believe in the prophets again. It's like, wow, are you ever going to believe in your pastor again if he misquotes the scripture?
No.
I mean, who's going to go to church?
Yeah. No, and Kris, I think there's a lot you're saying in this that I think people need to receive. Like, I think if anyone's struggling with the prophetic community because you've had an expectation of perfection, this is the perfect rebuke, because that is absolutely what you shared, Kris, is absolutely correct. And I think it's something to be received. And then the other thing, which I want to get into as well, which is the challenge of, well, people aren't handling the prophetic right because local church pastors haven't equipped their people on how to handle the prophetic. I think that's a challenge. Everybody needs to receive it. And Kris, my question back to what you were saying, I'm really thankful and respect everything you just said. Speak to, in this last season, the hard part wasn't just the inaccuracy of people. It was what I perceived to be the arrogance of people. And I think that's what made it so hard, was there was a sense from, I want to say, not from you. This is
Phil's having to qualify every statement.
But it's
we love you, Kris, and think you're awesome.
But there was a sense of when these words were given, of, if you're not willing to believe me, you're this. You're less than. You don't have faith. You don't. And I think so. I'm just saying. I think that's what shook.
Is that not exactly what I'm saying? Is that when the prophet thinks he's infallible?
Yes. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
People think you should be infallible. There's one dysfunction. When the prophet thinks he or she is infallible, there's another dysfunction.
Yeah.
And I'm saying to harass people, when you have to use, manipulation to get people to accept your prophetic word, I'm sorry, that's manipulation's rooted in witchcraft. So, I heard what some of the prophets were doing, and some of them were my good friends. They're like, if you don't believe this word, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I am infallible. If you don't believe me, you don't believe God. I'm like, dude, that is a cult waiting to happen.
Yeah. Kris, I'm so thankful. This is so helpful.
So what do we do with that? How do we lead our people in that? I come from, so to be honest with you, I feel like I have maybe a leg up in some of this because I come from a very prophetic culture. We come from a culture that's like, you can throw out the meat. We threw out the meat and ate the bones. That's Bethel. Yeah. We threw out, maybe that's what we're wrong. That's what I've been doing wrong. We threw out the bones, eat the meat.
Yes.
That we're able to actually take a prophetic word and bring it before the Lord. We still have a brain. There's like this type of stuff. But in the midst of that type of stuff, how do we continue to value the prophetic while it's either like, I don't want to like come to the prophetic jaded, like every word could be wrong, or how do I navigate what you just said? Like, this guy's like, if you don't believe this, you don't have faith. Like, you're on the wrong side. This is you're on the wrong side of history.
Right.
I'm like, I don't want to be on the wrong side of history, but I also have like some checks in my spirit, and there's all that type of stuff. How would you teach pastors how to lead their people through all of that?
Well, first I would say that not just in this issue, but when you react, this is a Bill quote, you typically build something worse than what you reacted to.
Yeah.
I think that what we all have to do is respond. The prophets need to have a good, encounter with the Lord and talk through like what went wrong. For me, I'll tell you one thing I learned in mine. I have never prophesied a politician publicly. I prophesied events and things like that, but never have I ever, in all my years, in 40 years, have I ever come to the podium and said, Donald Trump's going to be president before this. And by the way, I never intended to. I was preaching on providence, and at the end of my message, I got so into this movement of providence that I spoke about Donald Trump getting another term, which, I see that obviously as a mistake. But my point is, I don't think this is going to be my new policy. I am not going to prophesy political people in office publicly, and I'll tell you why. Because it is a way that you can manipulate people to vote for a certain person. And I never understood that before. So lots of people wrote me and said, I voted for him because you prophesied that, and I was trying to be obedient to the Lord. I'm like, I never Oh, I never intended that. Let me just say this one thing. I prophesied both terms of Obama and did not vote for him either time because I feel like my political opinions should be separate from my prophetic ministry.
Wow.
So I think it's really important for the prophets who are listening to this to take, like if you don't learn from your mistakes, you're going to repeat them. The second thing I'll say is I saw clearly how I made the mistake because I was preaching on providence. Obviously, I would think everyone would agree that Trump, his first term was like supernatural, like almost. How did he? All the posters got it wrong. That's how
Right.
supernatural it was. And I saw God moving supernaturally in culture. And in November of 2019, I saw this, this providential movement, which I still believe we're in. And I connected it to the supernatural way that Trump got in. And I said, well, he'll get another term. And they were trying to impeach him. They did impeach him. Technically, they impeached him. And I said, he won't be removed from office, but he will get another term. No, I said a consecutive term. Some prophets are still holding on to he may run again. But that was not my prophetic word, so I can't use that as an out. And so I think, and I look back over mine, and I actually can see, like, I used the momentum of a former word and the momentum of a current prophetic word and drew a line and gave a bad prophecy. And I can see that happening again if I don't take if I don't learn from that mistake.
Wow. Kris, I love how you talked about our responsibility as local church pastors to create what you called a purity through a process. And I think some of us I came out of a culture that didn't really believe in the prophetic. And if we believed in it, it had to be perfect. And so I feel like you just gave us permission and the responsibility of actually shaping a prophetic culture and not taking this one category. Like people gave me permission to grow as a communicator and as a teacher, but we don't give prophets so we've put it in a strange category. How I experienced the prophetic was Bethel students prophesying over me at Starbucks. And I got so many prophetic words, I started believing in it.
Yeah, totally.
And but one of my questions, Kris, is as a local church pastor, what kind of accountability when it comes to prophets in the church, maybe the dance between prophets and pastors, what does it look like for you personally? Like, how do we submit prophecy? How do we stay accountable? What does that look like in that context? So it's healthy as opposed to rogue.
And let me just answer that question. But again, my main experience is in a context where the prophet in our environment, Kris, is submitted within a local church, within a team, within an apostolic structure. Exactly. But so much of what was happening out there felt like, I don't, just not in that context. So I would love to, ask that question there.
There's definitely the tension between like national prophets and local church prophets. Like who made the decision that you're a national voice? Is that because enough people are listening to you? So there is some tension on a national prophet, local church, but also in the local church. How do we as lead pastors navigate this and submit it and kind of live it out, express the prophetic of Jesus through community?
That's really good. First of all, I think accuracy in history matters. And part of what you just called it out, both you guys, is that now, you can be like the Wizard of Oz man behind the curtain, and you have this huge platform because you're great at marketing, and you have this huge voice, and you're not connected to anyone. And so I think, first of all, I want to just call out people who aren't connected to anyone, because that, again, we want to talk about cults and how cults start. It's like having no community connection, having no feedback. The second thing I would say is that I think it's great for whatever fivefold minister you are, whether you're a pastor, a teacher, or a prophet, or apostle, whatever, evangelist. I think when you have prophetic people in your community and they're posting stuff about national events, if they're going to do that at all, and I just told you what my new policy is.
Wow, it's good. So good.
If they're going to do that at all, they should have a track record of accuracy
Right.
in the local church before they ever get a platform. They are ever allowed a platform to represent the kingdom on a social platform. And I think part of the challenge is you got people that they have no history of accuracy, or they prophesy like, Jesus loves you. And I hear people like, I've never missed it. Yeah, I've listened to your prophecies. I could put my cat in there.
I could put my cat in there.
My cat in there. Is that what he said? Yes. Put my cat in there.
If you're going to actually give, I mean, and I think I believe in encouraging prophecy that doesn't have to have it doesn't have to have a mate or a date or anything in it. But my point is like, if that's all you do, if your prophetic ministry is more the gift of prophecy, and you're prophesying, encouraging, exhorting, comforting all the time, and you're just telling, and it's good, it's all good, but you're not doing stuff that can be measured, you have no business giving political prophetic words or governmental prophetic words to major people and trying to guide a nation. If the church, if your local church doesn't trust you, you should not be listened to in a national venue. And I want to say again, for people who may be just getting on, I missed a prophetic word. I want to say, I wish I wouldn't have given it. Obviously, not because I missed it, but because it encouraged people to vote for a particular person. So I think that's a policy that I won't have again. But I have a track record, as do many, 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 many prophets, of being mostly accurate. So, but I know that a whole bunch of those people that gave prophetic words, some of them even in our movement, they have they don't have any local trust. So, like, what are you even doing?
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Listen, if you're going to empower people, this isn't just about prophets, right? But if you're going to empower people to the level you empower them, you must confront them. Because if you empower them to 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, if you empower them to a 10 and you confront them to a 5 or to a 7, that extra 3 points is going to be dysfunction.
Wow.
If you don't have a culture that confronts people to the level you empower them, you're going to end up with Absalons.
Yeah.
That's powerful. That's it. That phrase right there, the level of empowerment to confrontation. Can you talk to me about local church a little bit? We're in a. Can you unpack a little bit more what you believe about the local church in regards to the prophetic? Again, I feel a little bit lost here because the only thing I know, like I started going to Bethel when I was 17. I mean, I was there for 18 years on staff from 19 to 37. The only thing I know is what I learned in that context as far as how the prophetic operates. And it was always...
Which was not the context I grew up in.
Which was always in local church context at some level. You know what I'm saying? It was always there.
Sure.
And so but there is this... So I guess I would just ask, like, because there is parachurch stuff and there's itinerant people and there's... Yeah. What would your take be? And I guess I'm not looking for a rule or a law, but what would your take be on the prophetic and the local church? Like you said, like, are you trusted local or not? Or
and I
guess you said that, but
I could speak to it too, to say I grew up in a context that was just pastor teacher. Mm-hmm. And many, if not most, of my friends and pastors in the movement I'm a part of would function in the pastor and the teacher, very little prophetic, but they're hungry for it. So I think how do we, as pastors that have maybe seen it from a distance, begin to create that prophetic culture?
Yeah. And what's our take on the national prophets that aren't connected locally? I guess maybe that's too loaded of a question. Honestly, I'm not looking for you to call anybody out at all. I just am fascinated by what you're talking about, that if you don't have a local track record...
Yeah.
And yet we know how it is with social media and everything else. It's just interesting to me. And I think that a lot of these pastors, they want to have a tender heart towards the word of the Lord. So they don't want to be jaded, or they don't want to just reject what they're hearing. But then there's a lot to navigate on. Do I have to believe that or not?
Right.
Like, do I have to trust that voice or not? And almost all of them they wouldn't know personally. I don't even know what question I'm asking there.
And there another dynamic that you didn't mention that works in the local church is, the 1 Corinthians 12 says, first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, pastors aren't even mentioned. Yeah. The point that I'm making is that there are prophetic people, prophets, and some of them self-appointed, but let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. They're like, I'm a prophet, you're a teacher. You should be submitted to me, not me submitted to you. And I'm like, no. Listen, when it comes to the local church, your sphere, which is called metron in the Greek, your metron is the authority for that metron is given to a person regardless of whether or not they're apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher. So when you go to work and your boss says, hey, you need to be on time, you can't say, well, I'm apostle. The Lord has given that man or woman that sphere of authority, and you only have as much authority as you submit to. If you won't submit to your pastor, you literally have no authority.
Wow.
I think it's really important to this sword cuts both ways. To the prophet, I would say, if you can't submit to your local pastor, you have no business having authority. And to pastors, I would say, I don't care if he's John the Baptist or she is Esther. If God has given you authority in that metron, this is your church or you're in your city.
Yeah.
The people, I don't care how prophetic they are, they have a need and you have a need to lead them. Now, I'm not talking about reducing them. I'm talking about controlling them. I'm just saying,
absolutely.
I'm speaking to the pastor who's afraid to talk to his prophet.
Yeah.
They're like, oh my gosh, and you and I know, Benny, lots of people who have really accurate prophetic words, and they have names and dates and phone numbers, and social security numbers and addresses. I have people on my team like that, and they're calling out these people with all these, and the pastor's intimidated. He's like, I don't have that good of a relationship with the Lord. Yes, you do. You just have a different gift.
Wow. That's powerful. That's so good, Kris.
This is the one thing that I saw with Kris. I want you to jump in, Phil. But this is what I learned from Kris. There would be prophetic people like he's talking about, and it's unreal. Like they would be getting world events that would come out in the newspaper the next day. They'd be getting all this type of stuff, but they couldn't show up to work on time or whatever else. And one guy kept showing up to work late because he was in the prayer house all the time. And Kris would be like, "You're banned from the prayer house." Like he had no problem wading in with a gift that was so high level, but needed discipleship and needed mentoring and needed structure. He had no problem wading into that. But I would agree, it's a lot like his personality type and he's a prophet type thing. But I think pastors have to be in that same boat.
Absolutely.
I agree, and it's difficult.
No, I mean, I think one of the things that is obvious in this is Kris is demonstrating both high honor and high challenge. And I think if those two things don't carry themselves together, it's part of how we got where we got. Yes. And I just want to say thank you, Kris, for that. I mean, it's quite remarkable. And my two takeaways from what I think Kris is saying is the first, right, is there is a, any theology we build out of reaction is going to be a wrong theology. And I think at the end of the day, we have to, as pastors, come to grips with, regardless of what's happening in our circumstances, the vision of the prophetic is in the scriptures. It's clearly embedded to Jesus. It matters for the local church. And so our theology has to be submitted to him and to the word, not to what's happening around us. And so we've got to, in some level, have to get over what's happening around us, because if we build a theology out of reaction, you're going to build something really, really bad. And the second is, I've already felt this, but even as I'm listening to Kris talk, I'm sensing it even more, like this really painful thing of what we've created when we've separated the two, that were never meant to be separated, right? And I know this, the pain of the prophetic community of being unwanted by the local church.
Yes.
And now the sense of the pain of the local church of being unwanted by the prophetic community. And I actually think what we're dealing with is what happens when you try to separate something that was never meant to be separated. Wow. And there has to be a reunion of the fivefold. There has to be a reunion of the pastor and the prophet, and this deep need of both honor and challenge of saying we need each other. And I think, Kris, your challenge, so local church pastors of like, this is your house.
Yeah, totally.
This is your house. And I think it is fair because while I think it is totally fair that pastors in this season go, what the crap? What? You know what I mean? I think it is also fair. I think that is legitimate. And I think anyone who tries to make it illegitimate hasn't been paying attention.
Of course.
But I think it is also fully legitimate to go, yeah, well, you want to know why your church doesn't know how to handle the prophetic? Because you haven't pastored them through it. You haven't taught them through it. You haven't created a structure for it. You haven't built your theology off of Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think there is, if we want to throw challenge one way, we've got to receive challenge the other way of saying, are we actually creating a church that is mature in this issue? And that's challenging.
Kris, I don't know how much to get into the arena of how politics and the church and all of this type of stuff, and I don't even know if you should address this. Part of the concern that I had during this last season was I saw in the body of Christ this division that began to happen between people who were like, we're in a war and you are asleep. You are asleep. I am awake. Wake up. You're the reason why we're losing this war because you're asleep. And this type of, and it's probably not just the prophetic that's doing that. It's not fair to say it was prophets that were doing that. But kind of as we navigate these times, as we navigate times of darkness, as we navigate times of real demonic agendas, wanting to be unleashed, but also how do we avoid falling into that? I got on our church one Sunday because I'm like, dude, you have to stop defining courage by one act and fear by the absence of that act. If you open your door and you are vocally defiant, you are courageous. And if you don't, you're cowering in fear, Yeah. I guess what I would ask is, as leaders, as we go into these times, how do we not fall into that thing where, and maybe I'm just wanting you to talk to people that do it, but I'm not trying to do that. But how do we not do that thing where I just saw people are like, you're asleep, I'm awake, we're in a war, and you're the problem, and you're the reason why we're losing because you're asleep.
Yeah.
Wake up. And it was that, I'm like, whoa, like what?
Yeah.
Would you address that or?
I'd like to just say something I've entitled an apostolic response to prophetic words. And it comes out of many different places, but a great example is in Acts 21. Agabus, I think the most famous prophet in the New Testament was Agabus.
Yeah.
Agabus takes Paul's belt and binds himself and says, hey, this is what's going to happen to you if you go to Jerusalem. If I was in that room, I'd be thinking, don't go, don't go. As a matter of fact, it says that the congregation began to say, don't go, don't go. And Paul goes, oh, I'm going. And I'm like, this is an apostolic response. Like Agabus is like,
good.
You're going to be beaten. You're going to die if you go there. They're going to hurt you. And Paul's like, I'm ready for that. And he doesn't take the prophetic word as something he's not supposed to do.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Oh, love that.
Well, God just said, I'm not supposed to go to Jerusalem. He goes, Lord, thanks for letting me know what's going to happen, but I'm supposed to go. And then, his conviction about going to Jerusalem overrode his warning from the most famous prophet in the New Testament. And I call that an apostolic response. He's like, thanks for the warning, but I'm going anyway. And I think that sometimes we relegate our convictions to the prophets, and sometimes the Lord is like showing us what's going to happen, not meaning we should do something different, but just knowing how it's going to turn out or what it should be like. Jesus tells his disciples, get swords, and they get swords. You know what happens. They find two swords. Yeah. Peter gets one of them. And then, seemingly a few hours later, they get attacked. So Peter puts one and one together. He's like, okay, he told us to get swords. We got attacked. Yes. I'm supposed to defend him. And Jesus is immediately like, what are you doing? If I was Peter, I'd be like, you said get swords.
That's confusing.
What do you mean, what am I doing?
And what I'm getting at is that prophetic words don't take the place of wisdom.
Oof.
They don't overrule my convictions.
So powerful, Kris.
So, I'm like, we have to have an apostolic response to prophetic declarations. Think about Moses in the Old Covenant. God comes to Moses in the 32nd chapter of Exodus, and he goes, he basically says, hey, I'm going to kill all these people because they're rebellious, and I'm going to appoint you as their new leader. And Moses goes, well, that's a really terrible plan. And he begins to push back to God. And then this is one of those crazy places in the Bible. It goes, and God changed his mind about the harm which he was doing to his people. And my point is, I call that an apostolic response. God goes, I'm going to kill all the people. And sometimes, this is the way I teach it, sometimes when God prophesies to you, he's actually testing your heart rather than determining your destiny.
Wow.
And then the 32nd chapter, God comes back to Moses and goes, because Moses says to God, hey, God, you actually said you're going to take your people into the promised land. And if you don't do it, the Egyptians are going to say you're a liar and that you're a bad God and that you couldn't do it. And God's like, okay, I'm going. And then comes back in the 33rd chapter and tells Moses, I did check on that. You're right. I did say that I would bring the people to the promised land. This is totally ad lib, but
I told you, really.
But he goes, I'm not going with them because if I do, my anger will grow and I'll kill them on the way. So he says, I'm going to send an angel. And Moses goes, well, I'd rather be in the wilderness with you than an angel in the promised land. So if you're not going, we're not going. And God goes, okay, I'm going. And I'm saying this is what happens when you have a friendship with God. When God speaks, you have a sense that that it is inspiring a response to me, and the response is not necessarily. I have to have always an obedient heart, but my response is often let me say it differently. God is often prophesying to me, let me say it differently. God is speaking to me to actually inspire a response, not to get me to do something. And I'm saying we have a one-dimensional way of seeing prophecy. Yeah. God said it, he meant it, get out of the way. But friends of God didn't have that. Abraham didn't have that with God. Moses didn't have that with God. Paul didn't have that with Agabus.
Wow. It's powerful.
There's something else to learn here. And I mean, we're all learning. I include me. And that is, when God speaks to his friends, he's often looking for a response, not obedience.
Brilliant.
I mean, I think the thing that's coming clear out of this, like I even think about those, and this is true in all of those passages, but distinctly in those two New Testament passages, right? And I think this is what got so out of order in this last season, is that the prophetic word doesn't cancel the way of Jesus, right? Like here you have Paul, and here's a prophetic word, but the way of Jesus was willing to lay down his life. Here you have Jesus almost in this way of like I think part of what he's doing with Peter is like, hey, you're going to have to learn that you could use a sword and you're not supposed to. Like I think there's probably something in there about powerful. This moment of actually going, there is a way of Jesus that a prophetic word doesn't cancel out. And I think that is what was so grievous, was like people were willing to abandon the way of Jesus. And I think, Kris, what you're talking about is like, I mean, this is what we need is there's a response and there's a way, and the way is sacrificial love. And I just think that is the place that needs to be built up back into the body of Christ. Is that whatever the Lord's doing, whatever he's calling us to do, maybe be faithful and obedient, but it's never going to cancel out his way, his way of selfless love. I mean, it's just not going to cancel out his way.
I love, Kris, how you're talking about how the prophetic is relational.
Yes.
The prophetic, it is born in friendship. And I think if we can understand the journey of it, I think a lot of the confusion or even resistance to the prophetic is we don't understand what to do with it. I remember a moment with you a few years back. We were having a meal together, and you had a prophetic word for me. And you looked across the table, and before you gave it, you said, before I give this word, Nate, I need to know that you're not going to take this word and run out and do something with it, but that you let this word do something in your heart. And as a father, as a papa, you were helping teach me what to do with a word, that you don't take a word, it's born out of friendship. And at times, I love what you're saying, that some prophetic words are meant to actually do something in you, shift something, and not necessarily direct your next step. And so I just sent some wisdom on that. And as a local church pastor, like I want to teach on this more. Like, I want to create more of a culture where we understand the prophetic in friendship, in community, the relational aspect of it.
People want it way more black and white, though, right? Because this is when you're like, so wait, so what happens when? Is it right? Is it not right? It takes relationship, it takes maturity, it takes leaning in, it takes community. This is also why I feel like navigating the prophetic outside of community is just dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think that is what, when the Bible's talking about, let other people weigh in on this thing. Like people trying to figure it all out on their own. Often something I think is dangerous and outside of covering and all that. And that's why, and I would maybe encourage people with this. I believe deeply in the prophetic. The prophetic has changed my life and directed. Our ministry has been birthed in so many ways out of the prophetic, but it's all done in community.
Yeah.
So sometimes that
That's
thing
right.
of like, well, how do I know if it's true? How do I know if I'm going to be deceived? How do I know if I navigate this thing? Well, hopefully you have covering and community in your life.
Yeah.
And that you're able to actually kind of like process through this thing.
Yeah.
That's right. And when you have that, like when you have healthy family and community, healthy fathers,
Yes.
sonship, when you have that, it's actually safe.
Yeah.
Like the prophetic becomes safe. It's not about the religious harsh edges. Is it right? Is it wrong? That's a religious paradigm, not a family paradigm.
Kris, would you agree with this that, and we've talked about this before, that almost all the people that I see that have gotten off, fallen into deep deception, even sin issues, but we'll just talk about the deception or they've just kind of fallen away, that at the end of the day, it's not really about the deception, it's about the independence.
Yeah.
That there was this independent seed in them. And because of that independent, it led to a place of deception. But it's almost like deception isn't even the issue.
Yeah.
Is the fact that you're just
Wow.
independent and isolated, and the Lord was actually trying to bring people into your life to speak in, and you just didn't want it. Would you agree with that? I mean, that deception kind of somehow is connected to and is birthed out of just independence.
Yeah.
The most grieving thing for me wasn't, getting the word wrong was painful. So I don't want to take away from that.
I shouldn't laugh
So
at that. Sorry.
I feel like people need to know that. Like that's painful for sure. And it strikes at the root of your credibility, and it should. It really should.
Yeah.
But I'd say the thing I grieved about the most in this whole season, not just around prophetic, was the way people gave themselves permission to violate the entire New Testament when you are a Christian who did something wrong. So the scriptures about loving people, the scriptures about even loving your enemy,
Yeah.
the scriptures about the two most important commandments, love God, love people, among Christians, I mean, those scriptures are completely negated. If you do something wrong. If you do something wrong, if you don't agree with my doctrine or my political stance, you
So
are
true.
X and X and X. And it isn't just what you are. It's that I give myself permission to treat
Yes.
you, to excommunicate
Yes.
you, and to treat you as an unbeliever. If you get a prophetic word wrong, you are a false prophet and you are on your way to hell. I can't even tell you how many of those, over 3,000 people, different people wrote me. And they're like, you are a false prophet. You are going to hell. The only thing you can do is repent. And I'm like, it's interesting. I haven't had a single person, not one, in a complete year, in all this year, come and say one negative thing to me. But I've had thousands of them on social media. And I think that social media is testing the hearts of believers.
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And I think that we are often failing the test because people think they're doing something in secret. And what they're doing with their heart in secret is coming out in the open air. And I said to our students last week, I said, I want you to look at what you posted on social media. That's what's in your heart. I don't care what you say is in your heart. I can see by your posts what's in your heart.
Yes.
And when there's judgment and offense and unforgiveness and arrogance and those things, I don't care who you voted for. Like when you take love and when you say that person doesn't deserve to be loved because of X, dude, you on the wrong road.
Yes.
And I think that out of all this prophetic stuff and the politics and social justice issues,
I agree.
I think there is a huge failure among
Yes.
Christians. And I don't think people are watching over their hearts very well.
Yeah.
I agree.
I was saddened more about that than anything that's happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would agree with you, Kris. I mean, and it's interesting. Social media we've said this for a while, social media is not the problem. It reveals the heart. It really does reveal the heart. Somehow, like in ways that you would hide some things in your heart when you're around people, you just don't hide it online or something. And I do think it was maybe the most grieving part.
Yeah, it was.
Pastors calling out pastors and family members getting disconnected. And I mean, we even had people in our own church who'd been with us for years.
Yeah.
whose marriages have been healed and lives are thriving. And that all of a sudden was like, just completely disconnected because of this stuff and just completely accusational and stuff. It is. What's the way forward what's the way forward on that one?
Well, I think we need to start teaching people that what you say in the presence, in the privacy of your own home, is actually being publicized on public display of your heart. And I think humility is the only way forward. I've been saying this for a year. Like, humility is the only way forward. And when someone can do something in your life that allows you to put them in a category in which they are not to be loved, you have misread the scriptures.
Wow. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, and it makes you realize, right, like Paul in this whole conversation with the Corinthian church around spiritual gifts, why it makes sense that right in the middle, he calls them that love is the highest spiritual gift. Loved is the highest way. And we often miss that his whole passage about the real nature of love is embedded into a conversation about the church and spiritual gifts, because I think he was probably dealing in the Corinthian church. What we're dealing with is that often that's the trap we can fall in. And the only way out is love, like love, real love, agape love, God love has to be our highest value.
Yeah.
Kris, as a son, and as a pastor, but also, as a spiritual son in some sense, hearing you talk about the mistake, as you call it, of this prophetic word, to be honest, I'm actually more endeared to you. Like, I love you more, and there's something about fathers being honest about their mistakes. Like, I think two of the most vulnerable things a dad can do is bleed with their sons and dream with their sons. And there's something about, even as a pastor, places where I feel like I've made mistakes, or I failed my team or failed our church, and I've just been embarrassed. I've been embarrassed because I've built within me or around me this culture that we don't make mistakes. And so I think there's something so redemptive in the fact that, like, I want to be led. I want to be motivated. I want to be inspired by fathers and mothers who aren't perfect, who make mistakes, because that gives me permission to not always get it right. And I want to build that culture around me where there's a sense of like it's a part of doing life together. So we just love you, man.
Thank you so much, Nate. I love you too. So proud of
Kris, man, we sure appreciate you. Seriously, thank you for jumping on. Thank you for taking time just to invest in the ones that get on the podcast and listen, and it really helpful, equipping,
so good,
educating, healing,
helpful. There's just so much stuff that just happened in this segment. So we sure appreciate you taking time to do that.
Thanks for honoring me enough to have me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I don't know if we can end this segment without asking Kris to give Phil a prophetic word.
We'll do it offline. So we'll do it offline. He'd have to give it. I'd have to judge it. It's a whole process we'd have to go through before he could really land. So yeah. Well, listen, if you guys are watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. If you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, make sure you subscribe, give it a like. And we love you joined us. Thanks for giving us the time to sit down and just have these conversations. We'll see you again.